What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be talking about the Magicka Dragonknight. Now despite what people have been saying about Dragon Bones, Magicka DKs are still a very powerful Magicka DPS class. They do fall short of stamina DPS, so don't expect to be able to bring a Magicka DK for example, score runs. The kind of common thinking is why bring a Magicka DK for a melee spot when you can bring something like a stamina DK that pulls 10k higher DPS. However, if you do want to play Magicka Dragonknight, they're still fully capable of doing vet trials. Just if you are in a guild that does competitive leaderboard runs, score runs for the weekly and things like that, don't expect to be playing a Magicka DK very often for those kind of score runs. So just like our other build videos, we'll be going over our gear, CP point distribution, attributes, race, skill bars. Then we'll talk about our rotation, kind of what my rotation looks like, what I prioritize, and then finish things off with a 6 million dummy Parse so you guys can get an idea of exactly what you can pull with this build here. So starting things off first with gear, we are going with 2-piece Zaan. If we are using Witchmother's Potent Brew, so I do have a health enchant on my headpiece, but you can put that health enchant anywhere as long as you have a health enchant somewhere on one of your large pieces here. So now Zaan is the most powerful monster helm in the game. It is a little bit tempered by the fact that you need to be within 10 meters of the enemy in order to have it to proc. Plus it only deals damage to one enemy, so it's not quite as good as Grothdarr when it comes to taking out entire packs of enemies. Now that being said, a Magicka DK is very often within that 10 meter radius of the enemy. Because of course they're spammable, in this case it's going to be Molten Whip, requires you to be within 10 meters of the enemy, so Zaan is a perfect fit here. If you do need a little bit more cleave damage, then go with Grothdarr instead, but Zaan will ultimately give you the highest single target DPS here. For our 5-piece, we're going with Burning Spellweave. This is a dropped set from a dungeon, so City of Ash 1 or 2. We have it on all of my body pieces. You can go with Silks of the Sun instead. That's a dropped light armor piece from Stonefalls. So Burning Spellweave and Silks of the Sun are both very good sets here. Just keep in mind that they only come in light armor, so there is no medium or heavy armor variant of Burning Spellweave or Silks of the Sun, so you will need to get a medium and heavy monster helm set if you are going with the 5-1-1 setup. For our 4-piece, we're going with Moondancer. We have all of them have spell damage enchants, but you can swap out one of these spell damage glyphs for a regen glyph if you'd like. I didn't see that big of a drop in DPS, and the added sustain is a very nice bonus to have here. We're going with the Moondancer Inferno staff, but realistically you can go with any minor Slayer set here, so you can go with Infallible Aether or Master Architect. It kind of depends on which Inferno staff you manage to get first, so just stick with that set. If you don't have any of the minor Slayer sets, Infallible Aether, Moondancer, or Master Architect, you can go with 3-piece Willpower, and then just use, for example, any crafted Inferno staff on the front bar. The important thing is it needs to be infused, and you can go with either a Flame Damage enchant or an Absorb Magicka enchant. It kind of depends on whether you want better sustain or a little bit more damage. So the Fire enchant does do a little bit more DPS compared to the Absorb Magicka enchant, but that sustain really helps you out, especially in longer boss fights. And for our back bar, we're going with a Maelstrom Inferno staff infused with a weapon damage enchant. Not really too much to discuss here. So Dragonnight's best race is going to be the Dark Elves, Dunmer, hands down. But however, you can use any other of the magically inclined races if you would like. Altmer would be the second best choice, followed by Bretons, and then you can also use Argonians if you'd like. Their potion passive does give you a nice bit of sustain, however they do end up pulling lower DPS overall compared to the other 3 choices. Dunmer are just the strongest because they get 7% additional flame damage. Altmer only get 4%. So if you want to min-max, play as a Dark Elf, otherwise you can go with any of the other magically inclined races. For our attribute points, we have all of our attribute points into Magicka, but however, because we're using Witchmother's Potent Brew, we do have lower health than average. So if you feel like you need to pad yourself a little bit more, get a little bit more survivability, then by all means move a couple of points from Magicka into health. I would put 4 or 5 points into health, because you don't want to give up too much in DPS as a Magicka Dragonknight. Oh, I don't have a Mundus stone, so I'm going to go pick one up right now. But for a Mundus, you have two choices. You can either go with the Apprentice or the Lover, and that's all really going to depend on your raid group and the amount of debuffs that you have. So if you have Alkash and Infused Torx Crusher, then you're going to end up over-penetrating with the Lover. If you don't have Alkash and Infused Torx Crusher, then if by using the Lover you're not going over the penetration cap, then by all means go with the Lover. It'll probably end up outparsing or pulling equal to the Apprentice. But in all other situations you want to be using the Apprentice. So if using the Lover will put you over the penetration cap of 18,200 by a decent amount, about 400 or 500 is kind of the most I would over penetrate by, then swap over to the Apprentice. Otherwise you can go with the Lover instead. So that's something you're going to want to figure out within your raid group specifically, depending on how much debuffs we get and what the uptime is going to likely be. And then as I said earlier, we are using Witchmother's Potent Brew, so that gives us health, Magicka, and Magicka regen. There is a gold food from Clockwork City that you can buy off of guild traders or make yourself. That is basically a slightly better version of Witchmother's Potent Brew, plus it gives you health regen. But it is a gold food, so it does take perfect row to create, so it is expensive to make as well as to buy. So don't feel like you need to use it if you don't feel like you can afford it. Witchmother's is perfectly fine to use in all content. Now onto our ability bars. We're going to start with our front bar here. I have Ellie Drain here for the Parse later on, but this is where your shield would go. You can go with Harness Magicka or Dampen Magic. It depends on which one you'd like. Dampen Magic will give you a little bit more survivability. However, Harness Magicka will give you a little bit more sustain as long as you're getting hit by spell projectiles or spell damage while your shield is up. So it is better sustain, but only if you're taking damage, so do keep that in mind if you decide to go with Harness Magicka. Well, we're going with Molten Whip. You can go with the other morph with his Flame Lash. Both of them pull pretty close DPS. Molten Whip pulls a little bit ahead of dummies, but that's because you can't actually set dummies off balance using the without using Lightning Blockade and Shock Damage enchants, so it's pulling a little bit lower for me with Flame Lash. But in a raid scenario, Flame Lash will probably outperform Molten Whip by a little bit, but Molten Whip will give you a little bit more consistent DPS compared to Flame Lash because of the proc. Every time you set enemy off balance, you basically only get 2 Power Lash procs, so it is a little bit better sustained because the Power Lash procs are free and they do deal a little bit more damage, so it's kind of up to you which one you want to pick. I'm going with Molten Whip though. I have Engulfing Flames, Burning Embers, Inner Light, and we have the Destruction Staff ulti, Fiery Rage. Now, we are not actually going to be using this as our primary ultimate. Our primary ultimate is actually going to be Standard of Might. Standard of Might acts perfectly fine as an AoE and single target ultimate. Fiery Rage is just here, so we have our Ancient Knowledge passive. So if we take a look at the Destruction Staff line, Ancient Knowledge requires you to have a Destruction Staff ability slotted. So if we take out Elemental Drain and put on our shields, we actually don't have any Destruction Staff ability slotted on our main 5 bars, so that's why we have the Destruction Staff ultimate here, just so we can have Ancient Knowledge passive. Now for our back bar, Flames of Oblivion, Eruption, Blockade of Fire, Rearming Trap, Inner Light, and Standard of Might. Again, this is going to be our primary ultimate that we're going to be using in fights, both trash and boss fights. Now you can play around a little bit with the dots. This is just something that I feel comfortable with. This is the rotation and the setup that I've always used ever since I've started playing in Magicka DK. But you can play around. Some people like to put the Blockade on their front bar and move Engulfing or Burning Embers to the back bar. But that's kind of up to you how you want to play around with it. My rotation's a fairly dynamic rotation because of the way my bars are set up. So basically you have Engulfing Flames, which is 10-second duration, Burning Embers, which is another 10-second duration. Blockade is 8, Eruption's 18, and Flames of Oblivion is 15, so it doesn't really line up very well, so it is a dynamic rotation, no matter which way you arrange your bars. This is just something that I found to be the most comfortable for me. And now for our CP points, you have 240 points to distribute across each of the 3 different colors. So for the green CPs, 75 Arcanist, 75 Tenacity, and then you can play around with the other 90 points however you'd like. This is just the way I have mine set up. 31 into Shadow Ward, 20 into Tumbling, and the 31 into Warlord. This helps conserve my stamina in cases where I have to block cast, or if I have to use Break Free or Dodge Roll very often, for example in VHOF. For our blue CPs, now I do have, again, a disclaimer here. This particular CP setup is optimized for my raid group, where we only get Infused Torag's Crusher. We don't get Alkosh, and I like to use the Apprentice instead of the Lover, so that's why I have so many points of Dispel Erosion. You can see here that I do use constellations to figure out the optimal CP distribution, so I do highly recommend you pick this up. Basically what you do is you just do a combat metrics parse, and then you basically import your combat metrics parse here with this button. You have to manually input your spell penetration, so you're going to have to math that out yourself. And then you basically go back here to the champion points, hit calculate, and it'll tell you here what your optimal CP point distribution is going to be. I would recommend doing it with raid buffs if you can, or in an in-raid parse. So, you know, one day if you're going to do Vet Ethereal Archive, just take a Valarial parse, assuming you don't die during the fight, of course, and just use that in order to calculate your CPs, because that's probably going to give you the most accurate CPs for your particular raid group. So for me, I have 40 into Elfborn, 64 into Elemental Expert, 41 into Spell Erosion, 11 into Stab Expert, 44 into Master at Arms, and 40 into Thaumaturge. Again, play around with constellations and manage to find something that works for you. I have so many points of Spell Erosion because, again, I only have Infused Torag's Crusher as my only debuff. And for our red CPs, I like to take a one-size-fits-most approach, so my distribution is fairly balanced overall. However, depending on the content you're running and how much difficulty you're having surviving, you might want to readjust your red CPs accordingly. So for example, if you're going with VMAW, you might want to put a little bit more points into Elemental Defender compared to Hardy, because you will be taking more magic damage overall in Maw. 48 into Ironclad, 40 into Thick Skin, 1 into Light Armor Focus, 56 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, and 31 into Bastion. I like to have at least 30 points into Bastion for the Infusion Passive, which basically when you res another player, you basically boost their Magicka regen. So this is very useful if you are resing your Magicka DPS friends or your healers. That'll just help them get the resources back a little bit faster, which is always very nice to have. So that's pretty much it for gear and skills. Let's go ahead and talk about rotation. So like I alluded to before, Magicka DKs are going to have a dynamic rotation just because your skills don't line up very well. We have two 10-second skills, an 8-second skill, an 18-second skill, and a 15-second skill. And that's before we also take into consideration Rearming Trap. So Rearming Trap is if you go ahead and take both procs, it's basically a 12-second dot as well. So you can see here how things don't really line up very well. So you're always going to have a dynamic rotation. So starting off with your Parse here, obviously you're going to want to buff up with potions and start off with an ultimate. I like to put down Trap first, and then just start from my back bar, Blockade, Eruption, Flames of Oblivion, Engulfing, Burning Embers, and then start using your Spam Bulb Molten Whip. Then from there, you basically keep an eye on your dot tracker, which is you know, Strendar or Action Duration Reminder, whichever one you use. Heavy attack when you need to. Again, because this is a dynamic rotation, you don't really need to. I don't have a fixed point where I heavy attack. I just heavy attack where I feel like I need it. And that's basically it. So the dots that you're going to want to maintain are obviously going to be, you want to try to maintain Blockade as well as Flames of Oblivion, because those are two very strong dots that you have there. Engulfing Flames is also a very strong, not a very strong dot, but it does give a very nice debuff. Basically, if they're affected by Engulfing Flames, enemies take 10% more fire damage. So you want to try to maintain Engulfing Flames as much as you can. So those are kind of the three big ones that you're going to want to maintain: Blockade, Flames of Oblivion, and Engulfing Flames. Everything else is basically comes secondary to that. So, with all that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at our 6 million dummy parse. I will try to narrate through it so you guys can get an idea of what I'm thinking about when I'm doing a parse. This is a dummy parse, so it's not going to be entirely accurate to an in-raid parse, but it'll give you an idea of what the rotation looks like, as well as what kind of DPS you can expect to pull from a Magicka DK. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So you kind of have two options here when it comes to when you want to put down your standard. You can either lay down all your backbar dots first and then put down your standard, or you can just open with the standard and then use your backbar dots. See here, I'm not really, don't really have a set location where I heavy attack. Like I said earlier, I just kind of heavy attack when I feel like I need it. You can see here, I'm just keeping a track of my dot trackers here and just reapplying debuffs as they run out. You can see everything's kind of on a different timer. So don't get complacent with your heavy attacks, especially after you use an ultimate, because you do get your resources back after you use an ultimate. You still want to try to maintain your heavy attacks wherever you can. You don't want to fall too low when it comes to Magicka. Actually, probably could have waited a little bit longer for that ultimate. So that's it. That is a 6-month dummy Parse. You can see there, I did have quite a dynamic rotation. There wasn't really a set rotation. I kind of heavy attacked where I felt like I needed it, and that's just going to come with experience. I personally try to not drop below like 25% Magicka if I can, so I always try to heavy attack around 40 to 60% Magicka. That's kind of an arbitrary number that I chose, but you can kind of heavy attack wherever you feel like it's necessary. Again, Magicka DKs, because your dots all have varying durations, you don't really have a static rotation. It's kind of going to be very dynamic no matter how you set up your bars. So let's take a look at our combat metrics parse here. So we pulled 35.2k, so that's actually very respectable, and it's pretty much what you saw on live if you already used double Inferno staves. If you used lightning stave on your back bar in what's the previous patch? Not Horns of the Reach, Clockwork City, then you ended up doing a lot higher on dummy parse, but if you did use double Inferno back in Clockwork City, this is pretty much what you were pulling before, around 35-36k, so it's a little bit of a DPS drop because I have managed to hit 36k before on 6 million dummy parses on a Magicka in Clockwork City, so it is a little bit of a nerf, but it's not that big of a nerf. As you can see here, 35k is still very respectable for a Magicka DPS. So that's it for this build video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.